Did the US-Japan trade negotiations Trump personally participated in make significant progress? I once said that according to the currently leaked terms of the agreement, apart from the conventional requirement that Japan purchase US products to offset its trade surplus, there is an undetermined clause. The US hasn't finalized the specific content of this clause yet, but it wants Japan to sign the agreement first and then fill in the details later. Frankly, even if the US dropped more atomic bombs on Japan, Japan wouldn't dare to sign such a clause. Many friends have asked me to analyze whether the US-Japan trade negotiations, as Trump claimed, have made significant progress. The two sides plan to reach an agreement within 90 days. Judging from Fumio Kishida's response, it seems that no progress has been made. According to Japanese media reports, not only has there been no progress, but there has also been widespread condemnation within Japan. The Japanese public has criticized their trade representatives for being overly submissive and embarrassing the country, referring to the situation as a national disaster. Is it really that serious? Japan and South Korea are two countries that the US is most confident in controlling. Trump's decision to personally participate in the first round of ministerial-level negotiations with Japan is an unconventional move. Given Trump's temperament, he certainly didn't do it out of goodwill but to apply extreme pressure. Why did Trump choose to participate in these negotiations? A reasonable speculation is that despite his constant claims of negotiating with 75 countries, the US hasn't reached a single trade agreement so far. Facing domestic opposition and international pressure, Trump feels compelled to produce at least one trade deal, which is why he directly pressured Japan. After all, Japan is easy to manipulate, has a large economy, and isn't a fully sovereign nation due to its subjugation to the US military, so it usually doesn't dare to resist. Japan approached these negotiations with sincerity and was among the first to start talks. According to the US, those who negotiate first would receive preferential treatment. However, the situation is far from optimistic. Let me explain why. According to a report in the Asahi Shimbun, on the morning of April 17th, Japan time, Trump personally attended the US-Japan trade negotiations originally scheduled to be held at the US Department of the Treasury. He put forward 3 specific demands to Japan. 1. Cover the costs of US forces stationed in Japan. 2. Address the issue of low US car sales in Japan. 3. Eliminate the trade deficit. Let's analyze the first demand, covering the costs of US forces stationed in Japan. According to the relevant provisions of the US-Japan Security Treaty, the costs of US forces stationed in Japan mainly include the following. 1. Maintenance and operation of base facilities. 2. Personnel and labor expenses. 3. Training and transfer costs. 4. Environmental compensation. 5. Other special expenses. At first, Japan didn't bear any of these costs. The reason was straightforward. The US was an occupying force, so why should Japan pay for it? At that time, Japan only provided facilities and sites for the US military without charging rent or paying any fees. As Japan's economy took off and it started making massive purchases worldwide, even eyeing the acquisition of Hawaii and Manhattan, the US thought, if you're so wealthy, why should I protect you at my own expense? Through negotiations, Japan began to share part of the costs, but initially, it only covered the salaries of Japanese employees. Later, as Japan became even wealthier, it started shouldering the costs of base maintenance and training, and the cost-sharing ratio was formalized through special agreements. Although the proportion of costs Japan shared gradually increased, it was still not overly large. Now, Trump is demanding that Japan cover the full costs of the US forces stationed there. This is a blatant overreach. The US is an occupying force, yet it expects Japan to foot the entire bill unconditionally. Japan would have to accept whatever amount the US presented. It's as if the US is in Japan to make a profit. While Japan might be open to discussing paying more, covering the full cost is out of the question. Moving on to the second demand, addressing the issue of US car sales in Japan. This is almost a non-starter. First of all, Japan's tariff on US cars isn't 20% or 10%, it's actually 0. Yet, US cars still don't sell well in Japan. This isn't the fault of the Japanese government, nor is there any trade barrier at play. The problem lies with the US itself. Firstly, Japanese cars have the steering wheel on the right-hand side, while US cars have it on the left. US automakers haven't adapted their vehicles for the Japanese market, trying to sell left-hand drive cars as they are, which simply won't work. Secondly, US cars are generally too large for Japan's narrow streets, making them inconvenient to drive. Thirdly, US cars typically have large displacement engines that consume a lot of fuel. Given the thrifty nature of the Japanese, they're reluctant to waste money on gas guzzlers. Fourthly, it's an open secret that the Japanese, deep down, are quite resistant to the US. They long for the US military to leave so that Japan can become a fully sovereign nation. So, their reluctance to buy US cars is understandable. A visit to Japan makes the situation clear. Japan's car market is similar to China's in that the luxury segment is dominated by German brands, while mid-range and budget cars are mostly Japanese domestic models. However, there's a key difference. In China, domestic high-end brands are now rising strongly, eating into the market share of luxury brands like Mercedes, Benz, BMW, and Audi. German luxury brands such as Porsche, Rolls-Royce, and Maybach remain the last strongholds. In short, US automakers are underperforming and aren't making efforts to improve. Relying solely on Trump's extreme pressure won't change the poor sales performance of US cars in Japan. It should be noted that the above content contains subjective analysis and viewpoints. The actual international trade negotiation process and related issues are complex, involving multiple factors such as politics, economy, and culture. Third, eliminate the trade deficit. This demand is simply non-negotiable. Firstly, Japan is an export-oriented country that relies on exports for its economic survival. It has a trade surplus with the vast majority of countries in the world. Asking it to reverse this and run a trade deficit is unrealistic. Japan has a relatively small population and a severe aging problem. While it might be possible for the Japanese to consume a bit more US beef, they won't be able to significantly increase their purchases. After all, their own Wagyu beef is of higher quality compared to the ordinary beef from the US. Moreover, the Japanese have a strong preference for fish, and the US doesn't have many types of fish that are suitable for export to Japan. Not to mention other aspects, the US doesn't have a strong presence in the household appliance market in Japan. Its mobile phones are somewhat competitive, but the Japanese still prefer to use their own domestic brands. Besides, Japan might buy some aircraft from the US, but given the limited market capacity in Japan, there's not much else they can be expected to purchase. In my opinion, the conditions Trump presented to Japan are almost like a 2.0 version of the Plaza Accord. The Japanese representatives refused to sign the agreement, using the excuse of needing to return home to consult with Fumio Kishida and then making a hasty retreat. In reality, do they really need to go back in person to consult? Couldn't they just make a phone call or have a video conference? Of course, it's not that there was no progress at all. There was some progress in the sense that they agreed to continue negotiations next time. Japan is, of course, different from China. It didn't immediately launch a strong counterattack. In fact, Trump has never really understood how to negotiate with the Japanese. If the conditions he offers are too harsh, Japan won't agree easily. Just consider the proposed 25% tariff on cars. If Japan were to accept this, at least 1.5 of Japan's 3 major automakers would go out of business. What would happen to Japan's economy then? On the other hand, if Trump offers Japan overly favorable conditions, what about his other close allies like Europe, South Korea, Canada, and Mexico? They will surely demand the same treatment as Japan, and then what's the point of continuing this trade war? All his efforts would be in vain. Some people, like Truman, believe that the US was wise to choose Japan as the first negotiation target because it's easy to manipulate. However, I think it was extremely foolish to do so. Given the relationship between Japan and South Korea, choosing Japan as the first target is like turning one's own reliable ally into a hesitant negotiation opponent. To put it bluntly, it's like transforming a submissive subordinate into a lukewarm bystander who will only compromise and wait and see. For Japan, there's another serious issue to consider. If it accepts Trump's harsh conditions, how will the international community view it? How will the Japanese public react? Will it still be able to conduct business internationally? Although the Japanese public may seem docile on the surface, if they were to rise up in protest, even 10 prime ministers wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure. Trump's decision to personally participate in the negotiations likely stems from his anxiety, but in his haste, he made a big mistake. The first negotiation target should neither be a tough opponent like China nor an occupied country like Japan. Instead, it should be a country with less significant interests at stake, but where it's easier to reach an agreement. By gradually signing agreements with such countries, the US could create a positive public perception of negotiation success, which might be the best outcome. That way, it would be easier to manipulate Japan and South Korea later. Unfortunately, Trump was too eager to prove himself and show that he could win, so he chose Japan as the first target and ended up facing a major setback. Most importantly, I don't think Trump understands a basic logical flaw in his approach. He doesn't allow Japan to earn US dollars from trade with the US, but at the same time, he expects Japan to use US dollars to buy American goods. So, where would Japan get the money? The same logic applies to South Korea, Europe, and even China. You have to let other countries earn US dollars in trade with the US before they can afford to buy American products. If they can't earn dollars, why would they buy from the US? Negotiating in this way is simply unworkable. Countries respect the US because they want to make money from trade with it. If the US doesn't allow them to make a profit but still wants to extract money from them, then what's the point of maintaining trade relations? From Japan's perspective, signing any trade agreement with Trump at present would only make the situation worse than the current 10% general tariff, not better. That's why Fumio Kishida has stated that Japan is in no hurry to reach an agreement with the US. South Korea is set to have its turn next week. Given the US's attitude towards Japan, it's likely that the demands on South Korea will be even harsher. At present, things aren't going according to Trump's planned scenario. Japan hasn't reached an agreement with him, and South Korea is also unlikely to do so. If no country reaches an agreement with Trump, he won't gain any of the expected benefits. Moreover, the high tariffs have led to a decrease or even halt in US import trade volume. If there's no business being done, who will pay the tariffs? So, the anticipated influx of US dollars through high tariffs has also vanished. Trump is now facing a potential lose-lose situation. On one hand, he's been rebuffed by China, losing face. On the other hand, he might not be able to reach an agreement with countries like Japan and South Korea within 90 days. If that happens, inflation in the US might soar. To sum up the negotiations that Trump personally participated in this time, despite his eagerness to prove his victory, there was no significant progress. In fact, nothing was successfully negotiated. As a result, it's not appropriate for the leaders of the two countries to meet for now because Japan still needs to conduct business and export to the world. It can't afford to focus solely on dealing with the US all the time. In essence, the negotiations have broken down. After the breakdown, Japan's stance has become much tougher compared to before the negotiations. This means that Trump botched these negotiations. Not only did he fail to make significant progress, but he also suffered a major setback. Well, guys, that's all for today's topic. Goodbye.